I'm going to present a broad way of thinking about political economic systems. So think of our system as liberal constitutional democracy with some blend of the market economy and the welfare state. And I'm going to pose a big question about whether that system that we've lived under for 250 odd years is going to find itself under pressure for deep reasons. The broad way of thinking about these things is that it's a truism that for institutions to be sustainable, they have to be incentive compatible for all of the relevant actors. So incentive compatible things happen, incentive incompatible things don't happen. When one gets to political systems in the broadest sense, they not only have to be incentive compatible, they have to be values compatible. Values and the values that the institutions of the political system supposedly animate and promote. So listening to Sergei just now, this way of responding to what you were saying about the unraveling of the Soviet system is that at a high level, the challenge that the Soviet system faced were that the incentives created by its institutions were not aligned with the values and ideology that its institutions supposedly animated and promoted. This, by the way, was one of the themes of Roger Myerson's Nobel Prize lecture in 2007. So where I'm going is a blend of the Scottish Enlightenment meets Bernard Williams's late political theory meets modern mechanism design economics. And what this means for us, literally us, today, is that the received wisdom for a long time in political economy broadly defined is that autocracy and cutting-edge investment are not mutually reinforcing. They cannot persist for long in equilibrium. And this is quite a simple thought, which is if you live under an autocratic system, the incentives to invest are diminished. Conversely, if to the extent that there is investment in cutting-edge technology that promotes growth, that will tend to diminish the capability of the autocrat to maintain his or her their control. That's the world in which we have lived. In some respects, there's the origins of this in the history of thought are in Smith's four stages theory, and it's a kind of debated question how best to think about the four stages theory. My preferred way of thinking about it is each of the stages. It's not a literal history. It's not even a kind of conjectural history, but it's a kind of very rich general equilibrium analysis, political equilibrium, as well as economic equilibrium of various political economic systems. And where the politics of the day and the technology of the day and the norms of the day are all somehow aligned and mutually reinforcing. And there are kind of familiar stories that are consistent with this. So in the emergence of commercial society, particularly during the 18th century, after people are released from feudalism and they can sell their labor and they can exchange more freely and they have access to the courts. So a new class a more powerful class of merchants is pushing for the rule of law, and yet the rule of law is also enabling them to become more potent. So that's a phase of the development of civil society where the institutions of law and the institutions in the economic sphere are mutually reinforcing. In the 19th century, as we move into the industrial society with factories, so there are pressures for group rights, which are granted, which in turn lead to pressure for a widening of the franchise, which feed back into the organization of the economy. For those of you familiar with Marshall's famous essay on the evolution of civil society, that goes through legal rights to political rights and on potentially to welfare rights, which I think is more conjectural. If one finds any appeal in thinking in those terms, it matters a lot whether the new technology is consistent with that broad story. That as each technological innovation comes along, so what it does is it broadens the power to resist, and we move into an even more liberal world, whatever that means. So there are reasons for thinking that may no longer be the case. And I will start with the bottom bullet and move slowly up to the top bullet, which is the most important point. The bottom bullet is merely saying that a hugely important feature of the 20th century is that vast numbers of people in this part of the world and in North America moved out of blue-collar jobs into white-collar jobs. Those photographs of people sitting in offices, typing away, men and women, scribing away. And it's a newly emergent lower middle class, and they have a high propensity to vote, and they are the cutting edge of full franchise democracy in a way. And those are the people, those jobs no longer exist. That class is under much greater pressure than perhaps any other class. You can think of other things now that are happening with technology to the extent that more of our systems are now networked, famously the huge firms on the west coast of America. So that's a winner-takes-all economy that kind of fits with a celebrity-type society as well, and where the accumulations of wealth become enormous. And the question is whether the political system can cater, can contain the translation of concentrated economic power into concentrated political power, which remains an open question and is the best way of thinking about the revival of Brandeisian ways of thinking about antitrust in the US and elsewhere. But the big question is whether advances in technology now actually have autocracy and investment, frontier investment, being mutually reinforcing, which would be big picture and absolutely massive change. And some work's been done on this, quantitative work, carefully by David Yang and others in Harvard. And what one finds is, think about facial recognition. What one finds is that in provinces of China where there is unrest, after a lag, there is an increase in investment in facial recognition technology in the state authorities in that part of China. And with another lag, there seems to be a significant reduction in unrest of various kinds. The second thing is that to the extent that the state is investing in the new technology, facial recognition technology in China, that actually seems to push forward the development of that technology. In other words, for the first time in a long time perhaps, we have the emergence of technology which is consistent with the strengthening of autocracy. And were that to be true, it would be the most important shock to our way of life for 2.5 centuries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. China, obviously. How dangerous is the power of the big tech companies in the United States?
Concentrated private power, concentrated public power is always a danger. The whole point of liberalism, broadly defined, is to contain concentrated power, whether that's checks and balances on holders of public power or constraints on the exercise politically of private power. So whenever you see concentrated economic power, the question one should ask is that just concentrated economic power? Can it be translated into concentrated political power? And in the United States, that leads to the question about whether the Supreme Court justices, a few decades ago, understood what they were doing on various measures they took on campaign finance. My personal view is that they were out of their depth and didn't understand the second and third order effects of what they were
Does
doing.
America need a new Teddy Roosevelt, sort of putting full presidential authority behind competition policy and trust busting and monopolies?
I think the Teddy Roosevelt period is incredibly important, and it's broadly correlated with some kind of liftoff in technical progress in the world economy. And actually, it's in the earlier debate about welfarism in Europe, it's important for us to remember that we import technical progress from the United States as well as our defense. It's much easier for us to have welfare capitalism if cutting-edge technology development is coming from them. So that's an equilibrium itself. So the answer is yes. We're in circumstances, whether because of geopolitics or the technology, that require bigger leaders, bigger, greater leaders than we have needed for many decades.